Imagine a world where vast forests vanish, not over centuries, but before your very eyes. No war, no industry, no apparent cause. Sounds like science fiction? But the deeper we delve into the past, the clearer it becomes. It has happened before, and the traces of that catastrophe still lie right in front of us. We've simply stopped noticing them. History tells us that in the last 500 years, humanity has experienced only two truly global natural disasters. The first, the eruption of Huayna Putina in 1600, which spawned the year without a summer. The second, Tambora, which exploded in 1815, setting the climate back several years. But here's the strange thing. Both of these volcanoes are in the southern hemisphere, yet the most severe consequences somehow fell on the north. Why? Textbooks offer us a standard answer. That's supposedly how the atmosphere works. But if we compare events and eyewitness accounts, the picture becomes much more disturbing. It's as if there's another unspoken detail hanging in the air. We find the first clue in a strange place. In the fictional novel Roslavlev, or the Russians in 1812. At first glance, just literature. But the author, describing the events of the early 19th century, mentions a striking detail: an unusually bright star that hung over the horizon for many nights in a row, and gigantic fires, engulfing towns and villages. This all bodes ill, the character says. A literary device? Perhaps. But the coincidences are becoming too numerous, especially when we remember that other sources mention the same fires, massive, rapid, as if caused not only by drought, but by something more destructive. However, another topic raises even more questions: the disappearance of entire forests, especially in regions where timber has always been abundant. To understand this, we need to travel to the other side of the world, to Australia. On old maps, it is marked as New Holland. The Dutch were indeed here before the English. They cultivated the land, they built settlements, they marked their presence, and then they seemed to dissolve, without a trace. And Britain colonized the continent in the 19th century as empty. Why? Where are the vanished settlements? Where are the traces of people? No one is in a hurry to answer this question either. But as we search for answers, history throws us a new piece of the puzzle, and it leads us to Africa. On old maps, Africa looks surprisingly green. Rivers stretch across the entire continent, large lakes are connected by natural channels, and many regions that today resemble a stone desert are depicted as fertile lands. But then something strange happens. Rivers disappear, lakes dry up, cities on the maps are replaced by blank spots, as if they never existed. A coincidence? A cartographer's error? If something like this happened in only one region, it could be written off as inaccuracies. But when the same phenomena are observed in Australia, Africa, and Europe, it's a pattern. And here, the third piece of the puzzle emerges. In the United States of the 19th century, so-called freak shows become incredibly popular. Today, these performances seem cruel, strange, and frightening. But back then, they were considered common entertainment. People with severe congenital anomalies were so common that entire show industries were built around them. And then, a sudden disappearance. By the 20th century, the phenomenon almost completely vanishes. And the official explanation sounds too neat. Such children simply began to be born less often. But why were there so many of them specifically in the 19th century? What could have caused such massive developmental abnormalities in humans? What could have triggered this burst of mutations? This question becomes even more disturbing when we return to Russia, to where, it seems, the forest has always been. But is that really so? According to traditional understanding, in Eastern Europe and in Rus, the forest covered everything around. We are used to thinking of endless pine thickets and impassable forests. But documents from the 19th century paint a completely different picture. To understand just how different, we need to turn to the research of Vasily Dokuchaev, an outstanding soil scientist whose work revolutionized ideas about black soil. Dokuchaev proved a simple and unpleasant thing. Black soil does not form in forests. It needs grasses, steppe or meadow grasses. Under the forest, there is usually sand, clay, or loam, which means if black soil is found under the forest, it means only one thing: the forest appeared here recently. And that's where a disturbing picture begins to emerge. If in the 19th century, Rousses looked as if huge areas had lost their vegetation, then something destroyed the trees. And not selectively, but massively. Slash and burn agriculture. That's what they say in textbooks. But the practice of this method shows it is applicable only locally, and after a few years, the land turns into a useless wasteland. It simply cannot explain the disappearance of trees over hundreds of kilometers. And the deeper we delve into the documents of that time, the more frightening it becomes. The most terrifying evidence comes from descriptions of the famine of 1891. They reveal a detail that completely changes the picture. Peasants made desperate deals. For the right to collect the potato tops from 1 desiatina, they were obliged to plow the land, sow, mow, and deliver the harvest to the landowner. But the main thing is that the potato tops were used as fuel. It sounds wild. Potato tops hardly burn. They give little heat. It's enough for a few minutes. If people were forced to heat their houses with potato tops, it means there was no wood at all. No branches, no bushes, no old trees, no dead wood. A complete absence of fuel is one of the strongest signs that huge territories have recently experienced a massive destruction of forests. I have lived in the countryside, and even in places where there are no large forests, you can always find something for the stove. Old apple trees, willows by the water, thickets of poplars, shrubs. But in the descriptions of the 19th century, there is emptiness. Nothing. Not the slightest hint of wood. Furthermore, here is an excerpt from the description of a city garden. He looked into the city garden, which consisted of thin, poorly established trees with supports at the bottom. Thin, weak, barely alive trees. This is not what a garden that is at least 20 years old looks like. This is what a territory looks like where trees have been destroyed and new ones have been planted very recently. Or another piece of evidence about the road from the city. As soon as the city was left behind, nonsense and wildness began. On both sides of the road, there were bumps, spruce forest, low sparse bushes of young pines, burnt trunks of old trees, wild heather. What is described here is not a forest. It is young growth that appeared after a giant fire, and the burnt trunks are direct confirmation. But it becomes really scary when we look at the villages. Nowhere between the huts was there a growing tree or greenery. Everywhere there was only one log. Imagine a Russian village without a single tree, without a willow by the well, without a birch tree at the gate, without bushes, grass, shade. It is impossible. Such a landscape arises only after the total destruction of all vegetation. But the tragedy of the villages is only part of a huge picture. The second is the decline in yields. Previously, 1 pood of sowing gave 9 poods of grain. After the 1860s, the yield fell to 3 poods instead of 9, a drop of almost 3 times. This is no longer the result of war or crop failure. It looks like a change in climate. And indeed, during this period, the climate changes dramatically. Here, we can no longer attribute everything to Tambora, because its eruption occurred in 1815, and the mid-century cooling is a completely different story. And here arises the main question. What could have led to the disappearance of forests, the decline in yields, mass poverty, and climate change, practically simultaneously? Scientists and enthusiastic historians are searching for the answer. But the deeper we delve into the documents of that time, the stronger the feeling that the 19th century experienced something far more serious than local disasters. The mid-century cooling is a key marker. If in 1815 it could still be explained by Tambora, what caused a new sharp drop in temperature 40 years later? And why does it coincide with the moment when people stopped finding any wood for heating? When villages found themselves completely without vegetation? When fields yielded 3 poods instead of 9? When even official reports mention unusually weak tree growth? All these signs look like traces of a single colossal catastrophe, traces that were carefully dissolved into private episodes and minor local explanations. To understand the scale, it's enough to remember the Tunguska meteorite. Today, thousands of people come to the site of its fall, but few pay attention to one detail. There is no forest there. There are only young trees, 30, 40, a maximum of 50 years old. They are straight, thin, as if they were planted at the same time. Where are the old giants? Where is the wood that should fill the taiga? It disappeared. The exact same description is given by eyewitnesses from Russian regions of the 19th century. Young growth, withered grass, charred trunks, lack of large trees, fuel shortage. A coincidence? It's too detailed and systematic. Another detail is the roads. Documents often mention hummocks, sparse bushes, game, burnt pines along the roads. This is how the land behaves after it has recently experienced a fiery impact. And now, imagine the scale. This is not one forest, not one province. Huge territories are affected, from Eastern Europe to the Urals, from Siberia to the central provinces. And in almost all sources, the same motif. The trees are young, the soil is poor, yields are falling, there is no fuel, the climate has changed. But why doesn't anyone talk about this directly? Why in textbooks does the forest suddenly turn into the eternal companion of Ras, although the documents of the 19th century scream the opposite? Another important detail: descriptions of the settlers. The people who were developing these new regions often wrote that the land is empty. There is almost no vegetation. Timber is rare. This doesn't sound like the Russia we are shown today, but it does sound like a territory that has experienced a giant fire or a shockwave of incredible force. And it becomes clear, to destroy millions of hectares of forest, an event was needed that goes far beyond the usual natural processes. If you put all the facts together, the picture becomes frighteningly complete. We see the disappearance of forests in vast territories. We see young growth that appeared immediately after large-scale fires. We see the absence of fuel in villages where firewood should have been in abundance. We see a drop in yields to catastrophic levels. We see a sharp cooling, which came not once, but at least twice, and the second is in no way connected with Tambora. We see Australia, where the first colonists disappear without a trace. Africa, where rivers and lakes evaporate so quickly that it seems the climate has been switched to another mode. America, where in one century an incredible number of people with severe anomalies are born, and in the next, this wave disappears just as suddenly. All these events occur in the same historical period, and the strangest thing is that official sources prefer to discuss them separately, in parts, so that no one sees the whole picture. But if you allow yourself to look wider, then a logical question arises. What could have caused consequences similar to a global catastrophe, but stretched over decades? A giant meteorite? A series of powerful volcanoes, of which no reports have been preserved? Another natural force unknown to us? Or an event that simply has not been given a name yet? One thing is certain. The 19th century was a time in which humanity faced something so massive that the traces of this event are still hidden behind layers of official history. And all that remains for us are fragments, fires, empty lands, villages without trees, gardens with puny seedlings, fields that yielded a triple harvest where a ninefold harvest was previously gathered, maps on which rivers and entire cities have disappeared. These are not just random coincidences. These are traces of something huge. And perhaps the most important thing is that we have only just begun to notice these traces. The history of the 19th century holds too many secrets, too many oddities to dismiss them as mistakes, inaccuracies, or local disasters. And one day, when all of this is connected into a single line, we might finally see what has long faded from human memory, but has never disappeared from the earth itself.